This time I'm going to show you how to make this large zipped bag. It could be a cosmetic bag, it could be a gift bag. It's big enough to keep things like your hair dryer and sprays and things like that. Great if you're going away for a weekend or something over the festive period. And of course you don't have to make it festive. You don't have to put the applique on there, and you don't have to use festive fabric. But the difference with this one is the free motion embroidery. So instead of a classic meandering where you create swirls that look like coral all over the surface, I've just zigzagged backwards and forwards at random angles. I think it suited the style of the Christmas tree, and I've overlapped. It doesn't matter. The main thing is that you're having fun while you're doing it, and with this kind of design I think it looks impressive, but you don't have to worry about getting it 100% right. The trees on the front are purely triangles. What you could do, I'm hoping those are going to fray a little bit in time, but what you could also do is to encourage that by just taking a scrubbing brush. Because these are cut predominantly on the bias, as in the two long sides, it's not going to fray too much. They tend to go just a little bit fluffy. So I think that just adds a little something to it, but that's an option. So I do explain in the video how to attach these. I haven't used a Bondo web or an adhesive sheet with them deliberately because I wanted it to go a little bit fluffy and frayed looking. But of course you can do that if you wanted to, if you wanted a smarter edge around there. Or of course leave the trees off altogether. You don't need to put the applique on there if you don't want to. So it's fully lined bag. We've got little tabs on the end, so the zip doesn't disappear straight into the ends of the fabric, which is quite a nice feature I think. But it's a big, useful bag that I think would make a great gift bag, or of course one to keep for yourself. So I'll put all of the cutting instructions in the description box underneath the video, so go get your fabrics and let's get sewing. So I have my top fabric, 2 pieces of that, my base fabric, 2 pieces of this. I've already cut out my triangular tree shapes and I have 5 of those. My zip, which when you're cutting down to size. Then I have the piece of fabric which will make the little wristlet that goes on the side here, and a couple of pieces of fabric for the tabs which go on each end of the zip. I have got lining fabric which I haven't cut to size yet because I want to make sure I have this to the right size after I've sewn it all together. So let's take my tree pieces to one side and do this. Then I also have a piece of fabric which is the width of my bag, 1 inch or 2.5 centimeters deep, and I've just folded that in half and pressed it. And this is going to just make a nice little border. Mine's a little bit too long, but that's fine, across the join where the 2 fabrics are, because I just thought as the colours are so similar, if I just join them straight together they may kind of blend into each other a little bit too much. So I'm going to do this all in one go, so let's line up that edge there. Make sure of course if you're using a directional fabric you have it in the right direction. Line up the edge there, and I'm just going to secure this with a few clips and then sew, and I'm using a 1/4 inch or a 5mm seam allowance. That'll do. So just make sure that all of your edges are lined up. And so and I'll trim all this down to size later, but that's how that's looking, and I'm going to press that facing downwards, so that's going to create that nice little border. Now while you're here excuse me, I'm just going to put the free motion or darning foot on my sewing machine. So let's just pop inside here. Where is it? I need my screwdriver and of course the foot. So I'm going to drop the foot off. Your machine may look very different to mine, but they pretty much work in the same way. You'll take the ankle off, so you'll need your screwdriver to do that. Never easy using your left hand when you're right-handed, is it? There we go. Make sure you don't lose these bits because difficult to get replacements, so just put those to one side and keep them safe. And then with your darning foot, some of them have a bar which comes off the side which goes onto the top of the needle clamp. Mine doesn't on this one, so I'm just going to clip it on You will need one of these feet though, because they help the foot to hop across the fabric as you're sewing, because basically what we're going to do with the free motion embroidery is to dismiss those feed teeth and move the fabric ourselves. So if I just take my accessory compartment off, I have a drop feed dog facility here, so I'll move that over to one side and the teeth will disappear. When you come to putting those back up again, they may not immediately come back up, but when you turn the hand wheel towards you or you start to sew, you'll see that they've come back up again now. So let's pop those down. These may be in different places. You may not have a drop feed dog facility on your sewing machine. If so, your machine may come with a little plastic plate which goes over the top of the feed dogs, so they're still moving away underneath, but you can still move the fabric on the top. So the feed dogs are moving, but they're ineffective because they're covered over with a plate. If you don't have the plate and you don't have a drop feed dog facility, then simply set your stitch length down to 0 or the smallest, because then the feed teeth won't be moving. They'll still be there, but you can still move your fabric over the top of them, so don't worry too much about that. So put those to one side. Stitch length isn't really important when you've done all of this, because you're in control of the speed of the stitch, or the length of the stitch by the speed in which you move your fabric. In other words, if you've got a needle going up and down in one place and you move the fabric underneath there quickly, you're going to get a long stitch. If you move it slowly, you're going to get a slow stitch. So it doesn't matter how quickly or how slowly you're going to sew, as long as you're consistent, or as consistent as you can. Don't worry too much about perfection in this case. Now I'm using some H640 behind my bag. If I'm using wadding, which is absolutely fine, I like to put another piece of fabric or some tearaway stabiliser or something like that on the wrong side of it, purely because I find that the needle pushes so much lint down into my sewing machine, it needs cleaning afterwards. Whereas with this, it's polyester and it doesn't kind of shed like a wadding would do. So let's just pop this on here and iron it in place. And this doesn't have to be kind of really fixed, rigidly tight, because we're sewing over it. So that doesn't really matter. And I'm doing this before I put on the applique, because I don't want to sew over the applique. So maybe spend a little bit more time on yours than I'm doing here. Right, that'll be fine. Now I was thinking with sewing on this one, it's traditional to kind of do a meandering stitch, so you swirl around in different directions. It said, I'm not chopping that off yet by the way, that you shouldn't cross over the lines. I don't really care about that, and I'm not going to go in swirls. I'm not going to worry about that. I think by having triangular shapes all over this with the applique, I'm going to do kind of a zigzag quilt instead. So that's what I've chosen to do. What I am also going to do is to put my extension table onto my machine while I'm here, because then I've got a little bit of support. There we go. If you've got the room for it. I think it gives you a bigger area to actually move the fabric around, so for me it makes it a little bit easier. So mine just slips on here like this. On you go. There, nice and tight. Okay. What I also find helps, if you have a one of the silicone mats that goes underneath your machine, that can help the fabric to glide really well. I do like to use quilter's gloves, and these have a silicone tip to them. They're right or left-handed, you can wear them on each hand, but it just helps you to grip onto the fabric a little bit more, because otherwise you might find you're grabbing it like this to try and move it. Now I've got a really good control over here. So try and start in the middle. Have a practice first if you want to, and then with this one, as I said, I'm just going to do zigzag shapes, and they're going to overlap as well. I don't mind. So let's put the foot down and start to sew. So again, it doesn't matter which direction you go in, up, down, left, right, back, front, but do keep on moving, because if you don't, your needle doesn't know that, and it'll keep sewing in a big knot. Just caught a little bit of fabric underneath there. So again, as fast or as slow as you like, any direction you want to. We're not entering this into a competition, so I don't think it matters if you have perfection or not, as long as you're happy with the finished result. Now if you want to stop and take a break, take your foot off the foot pedal. You can always twist this around if you find that easier, so that you can see more clearly where you're going. And just enjoy it. Remember to relax your shoulders. That's one thing I do see with people when they're free motion embroidering like this, is that you tend to concentrate so much, you hunch your back over the machine, and we don't want that to happen. So just make sure shoulders back, that you're sitting at a nice angle to your machine, so ideally with your elbows at right angles, and scribble away. That's basically what we're doing. So there's a piece finished, and I think it looks really quite striking. It's really easy to do. You're going up and down, backwards and forwards, left and right. It really doesn't matter. You're simply zigzagging all over the fabric. When you're happy with it, then you trim down the edges of the wadding to make it the same size. So that's both pieces finished. Next thing to do is to decide which one's going to be the front, which one's going to be the back. Doesn't really matter, and arrange your trees. Now I'm not using a fusible adhesive sheet like a bonder web or heat and bond with this, because that's all very well and good, but the edges will be really secure, and I want to fray them a little bit. So if I put bonder web on the back, it gives a really strong kind of seal, so I wouldn't be able to fray them, which is great if you don't want anything to fray. So I'm going to arrange these first of all how I think they're going to look good. So I have the smaller ones in the background to create a little bit of perspective. And, don't overthink it. I think that looks quite nice like that. And then starting with the ones that I'm putting in the background, so anything that's overlapping, or this one actually, anything that's overlapping, then take those off, because we're going to embroider these first in their hole, so to speak. So just to hold these in place, I'm going to use a little bit of 505 spray. I'm just going to spray this over my bin. And so you could put a little pencil or chalk mark of the exact position where you wanted those to go. And let's do this one. And again, I'm going to free motion around those. So I'm going to go around the edge a couple of times. I find if I go around once, it can look a little bit messy, as if you haven't been able to sew in a straight line. If you go around a couple of times, it looks as though you shouldn't be sewing in a straight line, as though it was deliberate, which it will be. We want it to look scribbly. And then what I'm also going to do is just a few little zigzag shapes across the top of the trees, just to make them look as though they've been decorated. So back on with my gloves, and still got the free motion foot under the machine. I have taken the extension table off because I thought it might be easier to see on this one. So foot down, and away we go. So I'm sewing up to about 1/4 of an inch away from the edge of the fabric, in a reasonably straight line, but it really doesn't matter. And then I'm just going to go around again, and the second line won't be exactly on top of the first, but that's the way I want it to look. I want it to look as though I have literally drawn around here a couple of times. Okay, and then when I get back to the corner here, I'm going to do a curved line up to one side, and then back to the other, back to the other. So I've got kind of that zigzag, which gives it a little bit of a decorated look. If you wanted to draw that on first of all in an erasable pen or a chalk, then that might be an idea if you're not too confident in doing that freehand. Or of course it doesn't really matter if you don't put the decorations on. And in fact I think I'd just do that on the two big trees. So back over to the third one. And again, go around these as many times as you like. I'm using the same colour thread as my quilting, so it really does stand out a bit on these pieces. So let's put the other two trees on now. So again, a little bit of spray behind here. Don't spray anywhere near your sewing machine if you do have any 505 spray, and just be aware it should be in a well ventilated room. Don't put these too close to the edge because we will have a seam allowance there, and we don't want the trees disappearing into the seam. And you could also, if you wanted to, add a few actual little beads or sequins, something maybe that you hand sew on there afterwards, just to give it an extra little bit of zing. Or stars on the top, pots on the bottom, stalks on the trees, whatever you think. I'm just going to leave mine as triangles because I think it looks quite geometric and quite modern, just like this. So that's all my embroidery finished. So now I can take the free motion or darning foot off the sewing machine and put the regular one back on again. And don't forget to lift up your feet teeth. In fact, I'll do that now while I think about it. Right, now let's put the zip in the top. So my zip is too long, and I do want to add those two little tabs on each end. Don't have to do that. The zip can disappear into the seams if you wish, but I'm going to put two little pieces of fabric on each end of the zip that will finish up about 1.5 inches from each corner here. So one thing I do like to do is to trim this down first and chop those metal stoppers off the end. So let's do that here, just to make sure I don't sew over them, break a needle on there. So I want the zip to be about 1.5 inches, or what's that, about 7 centimetres, 7 centimetres, 2.5, about 3 centimetres from each end. And I'm going to fill in these bits with my fabric. So these are way too big. In fact, I'll need 4 pieces, so I can cut that down a little bit. And these are going to go over each end of the zip, facing downwards, trapping the zip in the middle. Let's do it this way. Way too big, but I'd rather it was that than way too small. So if you have a glue stick, this will help to keep the ends of the zip together. So pop a little bit of glue over one end, and that goes there. And then the second piece over the top, like that, and we're going to sew straight across, and we'll need to do that on both ends of the fabric. So a little bit here. Use a pin if you haven't got a glue stick. Don't worry about having to have one of these if you don't have one, but they are quite handy. There we go. So across each end of the zip now. If you do use a glue pen, by the way, or a glue stick, whatever you call them, don't worry about seeing the glue because it will dry clear, and it even washes out as well. So there's one, there's two. And then let's take our iron and the mat, and I'm just going to press these away from the zip. like so. Now I'm going to use my glue stick again, just to hold these two pieces of fabric together. Again, not that important if you don't have one, but if you do, now's the time. And then I can trim the width of these tabs back to the width of the zip. So if you want to measure that with your ruler to be exact, then do feel free. I'm just kind of doing this by eye. That'll do. And then this is going to go with the slider side down, so face down over the edge of the fabric at the top of the bag. So you can measure these if you wish, just make sure that those tabs are the same distance. Oh, we need to make the handle, don't we? We'll do that in a second. And line up the edges. You can pin, you can glue again if you wish, and I'm just going to sew down that side. So I'm not going to put the zipper foot on my, on my sewing machine, because if I move the stitch width button on my machine, whoops, where have you gone? There you go. It should move the needle over, that's it, over to one side. Still learning with this machine. And then I can sew just along the side of the zip, or down the centre of the zip, without having to change my presser foot. So I'm just kind of lining up the edge of the zip with the edge of the bag as I'm sewing. Then when I get to the slider, stop with the needle down, lift the foot up and just manoeuvre it out of the way, and then carry on. Now before I finish the other side, just missed a bit there, look, just need to go back over that bit. Before I start the other side, I'm going to make that the wristlet. I don't put those on many bags, so I forgot to do it. That's better. So let's do it now. So I'm going to take my strip of fabric, and just like with 100 bag handles we've made before, we fold it in half. It's a little bit narrower than I'd make a strap for a bag. This one's 3 inches. But you could make it longer or shorter, or leave it off altogether if you wish. This one goes to the centre. And then the opposite side to the centre, fold in half and press. There. And then I'm just going to sew down one side. And then fold this in half, and this is going to go just underneath where that tab was, or I put the zip in, so it would be about 2 inches from the top or thereabouts, and just sew within the seam allowance, so quite close to the edge, just to hold that in place. Okay, now we can put on the opposite side of the bag. Well, just before I put on the opposite side of the bag, I need to cut the lining. Oh gosh, nearly forgot that as well. So I've just found a nice contrasting fabric. You could use exactly the same fabric if you wish, but I always think it's a bit of a shame when you've got some really nice or maybe expensive fabric that you're using. So I normally use my rotary cutter, ruler and mat, but not everybody has one, so just sort of do this with scissors. So I'm just using the outside of the bag as a template now for the lining. And as I said earlier, I'm cutting the lining out at this stage rather than at the beginning, just in case it didn't work out exactly the same size as the outer fabric. Sometimes when you're quilting like this, your fabric can tend to shrink a little bit. So at least I know at this stage I'm getting the an accurate cut. There we go. And that actually needs pressing as well. Don't like working with creased up fabric. So could have had a little bit of steam on this one, I think. That's better anyway, isn't it? Okay. Now you could box the corners if you wish, by either cutting out the corners, so maybe cut 1.5 inches from the bottom of each one and do it that way. We're going to pinch the corners when we put it together. So if you were wondering what's happening there, why I hadn't done it, it's because we're going to do it later. So different ways of doing it, all looks the same way. So with this side, I'm going to close the zip this time. Just the same as before, but we're going to track the opposite side. We're going to use the opposite side of the zip, sorry. So line up the edges, make sure the edges of the bag are actually lined up as well. And so, and again, if you wanted to pin that, just to make sure you're really accurate, then that's absolutely fine. And then, just like before, I'm just going to line up the edges here. Doesn't look messy on the back. You can tell every time I had to change my thread, or my bobbin thread ran out when you look at the back. Okay, again I'm coming up to the slider, so needle down, foot up, and wiggle it out of the way. Oops, and then carry on. So that's how the outside's looking. Now we need to put the lining on the opposite sides. So which way round was that? That was it. So take the zip section, and I have the zip open for this bit. Lining on top. And I'm going to sew on this side where I can see the zip. So I can now, actually, let's chop off the end of those tabs. And we're going to sew the lining to the opposite side of the zip. I like to sew from this side because I can already see the stitch line that I've made, and I'm going to try and sew directly over the top. So line up the edges of the fabric here again, line up the edges of the fabric here, and then just sew straight over the top. And then we'll do the same with the opposite side of the zip. So this is what we have now. Let's just open out that lining. So that's the inside, and this is the outside. Another press. So let's pull the lining and the outer fabric just away from the zip, and I'm just going to press the seam here, and then we're going to sew all the way around it as well, and that will help to keep the lining in place, stop it kind of folding back over the outside of the fabric. Now if at this point, again, you might find that the fabric's moved a little bit. If you need to trim anything back to make it square, then of course you can do. I think this one's okay. And then we're going to top stitch all the way around the zip. So I can put the needle back into the central position again now. Foot down. And just sew. As you're sewing, just keep maybe pulling the lining away just to make sure that it's not creeping up. So it's nice and flat on the back as well as on the front. Zip there, look. Let's move that out of the way. Around the corner. And back down this side. Just make sure this is out of the way as you're sewing, so you're not going to sew over the handle. So again, just pulling the lining away from the zip a little. And sew. Okay, this out of the way again, and let's fold the two outer pieces right sides together and the two lining pieces the right sides together. And I'm going to sew all the way around the edge, leave a gap in the side of the lining so I can turn it the right side out. And when I come to the lining piece where the zip is, I need to push that towards the lining. So I'm sewing straight over like that. What I'm also going to try and do is to match up those two seams right here. So I'm just going to pop a pin in there just to make sure that they line up. So it might be quite noticeable if they don't. No one's going to notice if they do. Line that up again and pin. So we're going all the way around with a gap in the lining. Right, then we're going to pull out the corners, squish this so that the side seam is sitting over the base seam. You should be able to feel that. And then let's measure, sit that flat so that you can see. I'm going to hold that with a pin. And then from the point of the stitches, I'm going to take my far too large ruler and just measure 1.5 inches across and draw a line. A bit big. Like so. And then sew straight across the line. We'll need to do this on all 4 corners, so both on the lining and on the outer bag. So let's do this, go backwards, straight across, whoops. Pin out and snip across. And again, repeat that on all 4 corners. Right, then we'll turn this the right side out. This is where we needed the zip to be open. And pull the whole thing through. And push out the corners so you can see nice square base to the bag. And then we'll sew the opening closed. So just pull the 2 sides of that gap away from each other and pop it under the sewing machine. You could hand sew this if you prefer, if you wanted it to be a completely invisible seam, or if you're selling, you know, or if you're giving this as a gift, you may want to pay a little bit more attention to the closure. Maybe at least use the same colour thread. And then push the lining inside the bag. So where those little tabs are in the corners, we'll just push those out. See, it stops the zip from going straight into the corners. I think I've done this before on other bags, but no harm in revisiting it. And there's my bag finished. So, just a thread there. And another one here. Don't know where these threads come from, they just kind of appear as you're sewing, don't they? There. So, there's another one. So I think it's a good size bag. You know, if you are going to give this with a gift inside it, you can fit quite a lot in there. Maybe even something like a hairdryer would fit in there really well. As a travel bag, if you're going away for a weekend or something like that, and you wanted somewhere to keep all of your hairbrushes and sprays and makeups and things like that. Or of course as a storage bag. And you don't need to put Christmas trees on the front. That does obviously make it a very festive kind of bag. And I do have used Christmas fabric as well on that. But I just think it's a really useful size, and I just love that design, and you can see how simple it is. So if you've been fearful of using free motion embroidery before, then this is one of those designs that you can just let yourself go. It doesn't have to be perfect, you just have to have fun while you're doing it. And I hope you have had fun while you're watching this. I hope you've enjoyed the tutorial. I hope you make loads. I'll see you again next time. Bye bye.